If you're not already subscribed to this YouTube channel, go ahead and hit the subscribe button now, along with the bell icon so you can be notified whenever a new video is posted. And if you are already subscribed, check and make sure that YouTube hasn't unsubscribed you. Seems every week I get a few people who tell me that they were unsubscribed without their permission. Also, be sure to give the video a like. The white supremacists hate that. Now, that said, you can tell that the political convention is on. Monday night marked the beginning of the DNC's 2020 confab. As you would guess, they had the usual assortment of blowhards and losers and professional do-nothings. Michelle Obama, of all people, spouted a few insincere words about all the damage that Trump has done without mentioning that she and her husband were the ones who allowed the race soldiers to attack black people with impunity, doing nothing about it. Actually, they did worse than doing nothing. They actively encouraged the white supremacists to kill black people, Obama with his asinine blue alert executive order. He didn't have any executive orders to protect black people. Now, he wasn't about to do that. Nothing about black people at all. But of course, his blue alert executive order was nothing but a pathetic PR maneuver, meant to let the thugs with badges know that the police unions had nothing to worry about, so be sure to endorse the Democrats in 2016. See, Obama was in his second term when Trayvon Martin was murdered, and the slew of other anti-black murders took place, so Obama wanted to make sure that casual racists, read white moderates, wouldn't be offended by the sight of him actually doing something to protect the most attacked and oppressed group in the society. Obama wanted to make sure that all the racists who he had been playing footsie with his entire adult life, that he would make sure to hold on to their favor and that they wouldn't get mad at him and perhaps retaliate by choosing not to vote for Hillary. At least that was his strategy. So he was so busy making sure that the casual racists would not refuse or miss out on the chance to vote for Hillary that he alienated the black base instead. Now, you would think that as badly as Barack Obama got destroyed by Bobby Rush in his 2002 failed congressional election bid, you would think that that would have taught Barack Obama to have some respect for the black grassroots. But instead, when you had Tom Daschle and Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, and the rest of the congressional scumbags who decided that they would give him the golden nod, he looked and figured, hey, I'm already on the inside track. My election is all but assured, so that being the case, I don't have to sit here and play nice with these Negroes. After all, let the white media tell them that this is some sort of historic election, and they'll go ahead and get me in there, because it's the white powers, the white establishment's opinion that matters, not all these black people. At least that's what he thought. Obama allowed himself to forget that it was the black grassroots, specifically young black voters, who tipped the scales in his favor not once but twice. He wanted to believe that he was the one who did that. He wanted to believe that it was his white establishment connections who did it for him. You see, catering to white supremacists and trying to hold on to the support of the thugs with badges union was a losing proposition from the jump. But Obama didn't support the cops as a political calculation. He did it because he has nothing but contempt for black people. And he wanted to make sure that we knew that. Well, we got the message all right. And we sent him one in return when we stayed home in 2016. Well, history looks like it's going to repeat itself. Biden, the author and architect of the prison industrial complex, is running for president now. And to let everyone know that the white leftist establishment is no different than the white right, Biden chose Kamala Harris, a woman who defended police anti-black violence for decades and made it a point to target black people for incarceration whether they committed a crime or not. This is an act of blatant hostility toward the black polity, and it's being done as a means of political pushback. On Monday, the Dems had the first night of their convention, and it looked eerily familiar. In 2016, the DNC convention kicked off with no less than Sabrina Fulton, the mother of Trayvon Martin, giving some empty and insincere words about how black people need to vote because her son was murdered. At no point did she mention anything that Hillary was going to do about this. At no point did Miss Fulton cite anything in Hillary's past to even hint that she'd do anything to protect black people from white supremacist race attacks, much less punish the white supremacists themselves. This is reprehensible on the part of Miss Fulton, to use her murdered son's casket as nothing more than a soapbox for her to stand on and say, "Vote for me." Because that's ultimately what this was. This was Sabrina Fulton's political coming out party. Now, it would be one thing if she was genuinely trying to get into politics for the sake of going to war with these white supremacists through the legislature, weaponizing the law against the bad guys. It would be one thing if that's what she was doing. If she was trying to seek political office for the sake of using it as a platform to make punishing these race soldiers front and center of public policy. But Sabrina Fulton's not doing any of that. All she wants is just to climb the social ladder. That's all this is to her. And she's emboldening the next race killers as a result. You see, the DNC figured to use a dead black child as a prop to frighten black people to the polls. And it wasn't just one. There was a number of black children whose mothers were on that stage along with Sabrina Fulton. This was the cynical calculation of the white left. But of course, they can't do it themselves, so they get some front Negro to do their dirty work. Well, as we all know, Sabrina Fulton didn't give a rip about Trayvon Martin. She had her own personal reasons for speaking at the 2016 DNC convention, and those reasons had absolutely nothing to do with her son's murder. As we all know now, Sabrina Fulton was merely attempting to position herself for what she hopes is going to be her second career in politics this time. As she saw it, speaking at the DNC convention would be a big boost to her. It would put her on a national stage, same way it had done for Barack Obama 12 years earlier when he spoke at the 2004 DNC convention. And lest you think that this is just hyperbole on my part, that Sabrina Fulton was doing this as nothing more than a political quid pro quo, I scratch your back, you scratch mine. Just last year, Hillary and Cory Booker both endorsed Sabrina Fulton as she runs for county commissioner in Miami-Dade. But Sabrina Fulton wasn't the only high-profile mother of a murdered black child to try to use a DNC convention as their political coming-out party. As a springboard into a career in politics, Lucy McBath, the mother of Jordan Russell Davis, used her son's murder to get her all the way into Congress. And all she's managed to do in her time there is to push for some do-nothing legislation to study the social status of black men and boys. And her bipartisan commission will write an annual report giving recommendations to be submitted to the president. That's the best that Lucy McBath could come up with. No legislation about punishing these white supremacists who attack black people. Absolutely nothing about tangibles for black people. Instead, it's just, well, here's a proposal to put together a committee to do a study. Because the government doesn't actually do studies enough. They don't do enough studies. They need to do more studies. And if that sounds the same as Sheila Jackson Lee's phony baloney HR 40 reparations study proposal, then you ain't too far off the mark. Yep, Lucy McBath became a nice little cog in the white supremacist governmental machine. She found her place in the left arm of white supremacy, and she's playing it to the hilt. And I'm sure you also noticed that her last name is not the same as her son's. Didn't you notice that? And the same thing goes for Sabrina Fulton. Seems to be something of a pattern forming here. Now, it would be one thing if this was just a one-off. It's sickening seeing the mothers of these murdered black children standing on a stage together and none of them indicting the Democrats for enabling these murders to happen. None of them using it as an opportunity to demand hard punishment, spell out hard time for these bastards. Instead, these self-serving narcissists decided that they would make the event all about them. They decided that's what they were going to do. Because while Lucy McBath has been busy trying to put together some resume-enhancing do-nothing legislation, something that won't give any of those left-wing white supremacists any heartburn, what she hasn't been doing is putting forward any legislation whatsoever that might have her son's name on it, along with something that's going to actually punish the next race soldier who decides to take the life of a black child. That Lucy McBath is not doing. You gotta wait till some good white liberals come along with some legislation. You can't actually push something that they didn't sanction. But of course, white supremacy is nothing if not repetitive. So this 2020 election season, they're pulling out the same old playbook because after all, they figure if it didn't work in 2016, maybe with a little bit of help from the orange man in the White House, maybe this ploy will be more effective this time. Because on Monday night, we saw the brothers of George Floyd doing one of their pre-canned COVID-19 socially distanced endorsements for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. I suppose it was completely and thoroughly lost on them that both Joe Biden and Kamala Harris had been leading the charge to legalize exactly the kind of violence by the thugs in blue that took the life of George Floyd. And neither one of them had done anything to punish the police. Kamala Harris was endorsed by the police unions. Apparently, the Floyd brothers didn't know that. And it was so obvious that they were repeating what the Democrats told them to say. Floyd's older brother doesn't come off as the most well-read person, so to hear him say, "We must always find ourselves in what John Lewis called good twibber." If you want to have a snowball's chance in hell of convincing anyone that what you're saying you actually believe, that what you're saying is genuine and honest, then you can start by not letting some pasty white speechwriter feed you phrases that you've never said before and which the audience can clearly tell didn't come from your mind or your mouth. See, this is what happens when you got all of these idiotic, geeky white assistants and would-be political power brokers and influence peddlers, the kind who are working for Kamala Harris, who think that they know better than black people on everything. You go ahead and let them do the talking and you wind up with foot and mouth disease. George Floyd's brothers sounded so odd saying all the canned statements that these Democrats told them to say. But just like Sabrina Fulton and Lucy McBath before them, the Floyd brothers made sure not to say a word about punishing the police or demanding tangibles for black people. That wasn't on the menu for their little endorsement. Their job is to tiptoe around the issues and to get you to think that they actually tackled the subject when they did everything that they could to avoid and evade it. Black people want the race soldiers punished. And they also want the Democrats to understand they're going to be punished for the part that they played in enabling and emboldening these anti-black race attacks. These sock puppets will dance right up to the line, and hopefully the idea is your imagination will do the rest. Because when people eagerly want to believe something, you don't actually have to say that you're going to do it. Just tiptoe up to the line and they'll be so eager to believe it, their imaginations will fill in all those blanks that you left. This is part of the reason why so many black people will hear some Democrats say some feeble, insincere words about justice and accountability and will say that, well, that means punishment when they never actually said that. This is a political technique called weasel words. The idea is to get you to con yourself into thinking that they promised to do something for you when they never actually did. So you already know it means absolutely nothing to me when the Democrats send out these clearly bought-off family members to say some empty rhetoric about Breonna Taylor should still be alive, etc. What we want to hear is that her murderers will be in prison for life, assuming that we can't get them capital punishment. But the job of the Democrats is the same as that of their colleagues, or rather partners, the Republicans, to maintain the racial status quo through a system of controlled opposition. You see, the Democrats and Republicans are not fighting against each other. They're fighting against you and me. When it comes to the police, both parties are on the exact same page with the exact same policy. Protect the enforcement arm of white supremacy. As Jason Black was telling you about just a couple of days ago, Joe Biden himself has already unveiled what his policy is going to be regarding defunding the police. He intends to double the police's funding. This is going to be the 94 crime bill all over again. That's what he's proposing. We got to make sure that they get hundreds of millions of dollars in funding. Well, are there going to be any punishments attached? No strings attached. No strings. We don't do that. Not with the police. They're the good guys. Neither the Democrats nor Republicans will sponsor or even propose a law that withholds funding from cities and states unless they put laws on the books removing any sort of qualified immunity or putting harsh punishment into law for police who harm black people. You have not heard Kamala Harris say anything like that, and she's not going to. You have not heard Joe Biden say that we need to withhold funding from these states and these cities unless they remove all of this onerous protection for the police. The police have to be held to the same standard as anybody else. They should have they should have absolutely no more protection under law than anyone else. In fact, they deserve extraordinary punishment because of how important their job is. The police always like to lecture people about how important their job is and how they should have special status because of that. I say they should also have special punishment because of that status as well. To whom much is given, much should also be taken as well. But after the 2016 and now 2020 DNC conventions, I hope that it becomes a lot more clear to some of you now why it is that people like Jason, Tariq, and myself have taken the hard line that when it comes to black folks who are murdered in some anti-black race attack, we can decry the attack, we can decry the attacker, but we're not going to be getting out there trying to figure out how to do some crowdfunding unless the person puts in some work. The case of Kenneth Walker, that happened to be an exception to the rule. Why? Because the brother went ahead and put in some work. And what happened was the police, thanks to Judge Olu Stevens, thank God for him, the police were wondering, well, isn't this guy going to be punished? Nope, letting him go. And we go ahead and put some money together just to make it clear. When you defend yourself from a thugs in blue attack, the public is going to have your back. We got the backs of those who defend themselves against police racial violence. That was the message that was sent. And it was a clear and unambiguous one, but one that you don't see any of the Democrats attempting to support or promote or to embolden or augment. The Democrats ain't getting behind that. No, as far as they're concerned, the policy and the bullets should only go in one direction, towards black people. That's what they're trying to do. So we need to make it clear. Whenever you got we do not need to be putting on the cape the moment that a black person is murdered by some white supremacist, whatever color they may be. Because these families have been using this as an opportunity for a come up. And that ain't what our support's supposed to be about. So a lot of people didn't understand that a lot of these families, they are not really grieving at all. In many cases, they probably did not even like the individuals who were killed. But as far as they were concerned, they're going to take the black community's outrage and they're going to use that to try to as some sort of monetary leverage. And that is not what our support is for. These families are as much sock puppets for the left arm of white supremacy as Simone Mammy Sanders, Corrine Stud Pierre, or Mark Lamont You Big Dummy Hill. The idea is to trot out these willing tools who, to my mind, are accomplices after the fact and have them speak to the cameras who the white media will make sure are all there in an effort to shout us down. I told you they'd be pulling out all the stops. Oprah in Louisville and now this. Our message has been reaching black people, especially young black people. And the left wing of white supremacy knows that they have to do some major counter-programming. But we need to be brutally honest, family. We know that a numerical plurality of black people in this country will be completely worthless to black empowerment. More black people than you may be comfortable admitting to are only too eager to sell out. I would love to be able to tell you that Lucy McBath and Sabrina Fulton and the Floyd brothers are some sort of wild, perverted, straight out of Mars exception to the rule, but that would be a bald-faced lie. Tragically, they are quite normal in the black community, and that's a problem. That's the reason why over a decade ago, I stated that the mission of the black media is to take control of the social discourse within the black community and to elevate the debate. We're supposed to be taking control of this discourse. That way, our people understand that what the Floyd brothers and Sabrina Fulton and Lucy McBath have done is wrong and inexcusable, and it is intolerable. Everybody's on the same page and understands, hey, you're off code like hell. It's important that we all be on the same page, but putting people on the same page has to be enforced. It's not something that people are going to come to or stick to naturally. They need to be told what page they need to be on, and it also needs to be clear to them what the enforcement is, what the penalties are for being off code. We are outraged by all the murders of black people that's been going on, but as we've seen with these black families who begin playing footsie with white supremacy, all they're looking for is some attention from the white media. I'm thinking about Stavante Clark's brother, or some quick cash from the city. And we need to be honest about that. Stop assuming that you got allies in places that you don't. Stop assuming that these families are going to be, sooner or later, they're going to wise up. No, they're already where they want to be. In the hip pocket of established white power. Most black people may want to see anti-black violence punished, but most black people would also allow their loved ones to be murdered by some white supremacist with impunity so long as they get some money or 15 minutes of fame. And that's just the stark, cold reality. Black people know that the dominant society wants us to suffer in silence. Better yet, they want us to bless their murders. When they murder a black person, they want black folks to say, oh, I ain't holding no grudges. Well, it could have happened to anybody. No, nothing racial about it at all. And isn't that exactly what these families have done? So they demand that we forgive, and hug them in court and say they weren't racist, etc. And while everyone knows that these phony baloney displays are not truly motivated by moral concern and mostly motivated by self-interest, we also know that most black folks value getting a pat on the head more than they do the lives of their own black family members. And understand something, it is not some victimless crime whenever you got people who decide that they're going to excuse away what are clearly racial murders. What Lucy McBath and the Floyd brothers and Sabrina Fulton and others have done, what they do is they contribute to an atmosphere of, you go ahead and kill a black person, and black folks, well, they're just going to be looking to get some sort of payoff. You think the white supremacists can't see that? They can, and a lot of black folks are counting on that. They figure, okay, it's a game. If I don't give you guys any trouble, you'll go ahead and give me something, right? Those of us who are uncompromising about punishing the perpetrators of anti-black violence are a minority within the black community. We need to be honest about that. But you know what else? It's always a small, determined minority who changes things, not the masses. So we don't want or need the majority of black people to be on the same page as us. All we need is a critical mass, which I believe that we are very close to at this point. As we see, whenever TBA or Tariq have people call in to their broadcast, too many silly black folks, even in places like this, are stuck on stupid. And it's fine that we're a minority because those are the only ones who actually change things. But in order to do that, we have to take a hard-nosed, uncompromising approach to our power. We have to be absolutely uncompromising when it comes to pursuing our interest and when it comes to making sure that those who fight against our interest are penalized. This is why we say that we can't get on the warpath for these families whose loved ones are getting killed because, first of all, they're not really loved ones of the family. They're just related, but that's about where the sympathy and where the charity ends. We wait until we see what the families say, because in almost all these cases, with the exception of a Tatiana Jefferson, they've all clearly been waiting for the white authorities to give them some media attention or some money. They make it clear they'll play ball if white power hands them some crumbs. Now that might be good enough for them, but that damn well better not be good enough for you. So while it does disgust me to see yet again, you got some black folks who are trying to use the murder of their family members as a means to gain something for themselves. While that does disgust me, It doesn't surprise me. Using dead black people is nothing more than political props. Both parties do it when it suits their interests. But let's understand the Democrats are running the same old plays, and they will yield the same old results. Now, just a day or so after the Floyd brothers put on their disgusting display, you had a column-written opinion piece for Jeff Bezos' Washington Post, the white supremacist paper of record inside the Beltway, written by Paul Butler. You guys know Paul Butler. You've seen him on cable TV. He's another one of those mushmouth lawyers. I think that's like a prerequisite for a lot of these clowns. Like basically, if you're black, they won't admit you to the bar unless you have some sort of profound speech impediment. But Paul Butler, who happens to be a former federal prosecutor, guess that puts him in the same company as Kamala Harris, doesn't it? Well, he wrote an opinion piece, and you can probably guess what it was. Kamala Harris doesn't have a problem with black men, and they shouldn't have a problem with her. Well, there's nothing like having some clown who basically is only known because he shows up on cable TV, calling himself lecturing black people about what we should or should not think. Trying to dictate to us what we ought to think. Well, you shouldn't have a problem with that. Who the hell are you to try to tell me what I should think? I know this sounds a lot like Agent Duvernay, doesn't it? Yeah, you got these black bootlicks like every Negro who the white media's ever given a couple of crumbs to. They're being told you better go out there and you better get those niggers back on board, because they caused us all this problem this summer, and you better bring an end to it, or what the hell do we need you for? So that's what it is that this clown Paul Butler is up to. Obviously, he's going to be sticking up for Kamala Harris because all of these idiots are basically mobbed up together, all of them against us. But the problem is they're finding that the old divide and conquer strategy, the gender war strategy they were going to try to use, apparently it's not working. Otherwise, Paul Butler wouldn't have had to write this. He would not have to be saying anything about black men. It would be all about black women are going to power Kamala Harris right into the White House. Oh, it's going to be an uninterrupted success story. Oh, Donald Trump will never know what hit him. Except the problem is you need black men and black women together, particularly young black men and young black women together, in order to constitute a large enough demographic to be a swing vote. You can't just have part of it. You're going to need all hands on deck, which explains why it is that you've had so many of these black bootlicks that the white media has been trotting out to cheerlead for Kamala Harris. They've been trying to do the old you go girl, black girl magic for black women. And now we have Paul Butler doing the shaming tactics against black men. And the main pathetic line that you see from black bootlicks like Paul Butler is the stale lie that Kamala's position has changed, but it's a different time. That scumbag actually wrote that. He gave passing blink and you'll miss it mention to Kamala Harris's reprehensible anti-black racism when she was in California. And he tries to talk about that as, well, it was a different time. Stupid. It was only a few years ago. They use that lie, by the way. It was a different time. They use that for Kamala Harris over and over again. Paul Butler's not the only one. A number of white media outlets have tried to act as if, oh, well, when Kamala Harris was California Attorney General and when she was San Francisco DA and when she was an assistant DA in Alameda County, why, that was a different time. Yeah, because we all know the LA riots hadn't happened. Trayvon Martin was murdered in 2013. You had the Mother Emanuel Church massacre that occurred just a couple of years later. And you had a number of killings of black people that have been taking place across the board. High-profile black murders. All of this during the Obama years. Say, where was Kamala Harris at in 2013? Oh, that's right. She was Attorney General of California. That's what she was doing. See, the white media sitting here using weasel words, trying to make it sound like, oh, it was so long ago. You know, the horse and buggy was still the standard means of transportation. Black and white TVs, don't you know? That's what the white media is doing. It's pathetic to see them acting as if just a few years ago, when Barack Obama was president, when you had people marching in the streets demanding justice for the murders of Eric Garner and Aiyana Jones and so many others, you had Kamala Harris trying to figure out how to lock up as many black people as possible. See, Kamala Harris was in California talking out of both sides of her neck. When she was in front of black people, it was all, oh, you know, your community's overlooked and disadvantaged. Whenever she was in front of the police, give me your endorsement, I'll lock up all those niggers. So no, it's not that Kamala Harris didn't know better. And imagine they're using that lie for her. Oh, it was a different time. You see, up until now, that whole lie about it was a different time, you know, she just didn't know better. Usually the only time that we hear that lie is when you have some white supremacist trying to whitewash the reprehensible actions of a Strom Thurmond, or to excuse away Thomas Jefferson's slave owning. Or whenever some white person is making excuses for this or that white supremacist. That's usually what the white media will drag out that old saw as a means of trying to excuse away their anti-black racism. Well, it was a different time, yeah, but now they're bringing it out for Kamala Harris. Well, Kamala wasn't defending police racism 50 years ago. She wasn't railroading people into death row, innocent people onto death row 50 years ago. She wasn't using low-level offenders, deliberately trying to keep them from being able to leave prison so that they could be pressed into slave labor to protect rich white people's homes. She wasn't doing that 50 years ago. It was only 5 years ago when she was California Attorney General. She didn't get the police's endorsement and make sure that she went overboard to protect cops who kill black people 50 years ago. She was doing that just 10 years ago. What the hell is going on here with the white media thinking that people don't have access to Google? She wasn't trying to keep innocent black people on death row back in the 70s or even the 80s. She was doing it just 5 years ago when Barack Obama was in the White House. The white media's asinine attempt to try to make it sound like, oh, well, the country had different sensibilities back then. Back then, it was a different country, don't you know? Yeah, because seeing all those people protesting by the millions against police brutality since 2013, against all these white supremacist killings of black people that have taken place since 2013, well, how could Kamala Harris possibly have known about that? They're terrified of saying what's really going on. The times have not changed, but the political climate has. And the political climate has now turned punitive towards all those people who have been sitting on their hands, all those people who thought to themselves that, oh, I know how to deal with this. I'm going to say that I care about black people being killed and the police, they can't, we have to have accountability and that'll get me by. No, what's happening is they're actually being held to account and they're being punished. That's what's happening. A culture of accountability is beginning to rise. And Kamala Harris is finding out that, nah, you ain't going to talk your way out of this one. All of your sins have found you, and now for the first time, they're going to follow you. And that is something new on the political landscape. Typically what's happened is you could be a Barack Obama, and you could be talking grimy about black folks. And if black people reject you at the Chicago city level, well, you can get Tom Daschle and Chuck Schumer to plug you into the DNC national machine, and they'll make sure you get a quickie senatorship, which will be nothing more than a pit stop on your way to the White House. Or if you're Kamala Harris, all you got to do is a little bit of dictation for old low-down Willie Brown in San Francisco, and they'll plug you into the California political machine. And without even having to get up off of your knee pad, you'll be coasting all the way to the U.S. Senate. The California political machine will make sure that. See, that's what's happened in the past. They've been insulated from the results and the ramifications and the consequences of their anti-black actions. But now it's a new social climate being led by the black media. And in this climate, when you cross us, you will pay. That's the problem for Kamala Harris and for the white media who's backing her up. Paul Butler, in his little non-think piece, gives nothing more than what's a naked, asinine lecture to black men that if black men don't support Kamala Harris, it's because you're all sexist. That's what Paul Butler is saying. that black men, he cites Luther Campbell of all people, that black men don't like it that Kamala Harris has a white husband. First of all, I can't think of anyone who has actually brought up Kamala Harris's husband in any sort of sustained way as the basis for objecting to her holding political office. Of all of the objections and the complaints and the grievances with Kamala Harris, her husband wouldn't crack the top 100, okay? Secondly, I do believe that nobody was telling black women 8 years ago or even 12 years ago that, hey, Barack Obama, if he had a white wife, would you still be voting for him? Nobody was telling black women that there was anything wrong with them, making it clear that, hey, if he had something other than a black wife, I don't know if I'd show up to the polls. So why is it that black men are hearing this? You see, this is the white media and some of their black tools who are basically venting white supremacy's constant perennial phobia and paranoia about black people's sexual habits. But the thing is, this ain't even dealing with a black person. This is dealing with an Asian American. So black people should not even be coming up into the conversation. All of these attempts to prop up straw men arguments to shame black men into silence, it's not going to work. Because we know that white power and their black sock puppets are terrified to deal with Kamala's legal record. Because to do so is to validate that a Democrat shouldn't be president unless they have a track record of locking up black people. That's why they want Kamala Harris to win. That's the reason why. This is to validate white supremacy's anti-black war. And the last thing that they want to do is to make an issue out of the fact that all black people are saying, if you use your position, if you were part of the apparatus, the prison industrial complex, locking up black people, you should not be able to hold public office. Kamala Harris is not some misunderstood heroine. She's not some put upon but otherwise honorable individual. She is a feculent, perverted, lifelong, virulent, anti-black racist. She is one of the most sick, demented, twisted, perverted, venal, corrupt, sickening individuals to ever hold public office. She laughed and cackled like the witch she is every time she talked about putting black people in prison. It didn't matter if it was her truancy policy that she was laughing about or her stance on marijuana. You talk about locking up black folks, Kamala Harris just could not contain herself. So this last-minute pathetic effort by the white media and their black bootlicks to try to reinvent Harris and to try to fix her image, we got to do some image management. We got to do some image rehabilitation for her. That ain't going to work. And attacking black men in particular, which are nothing more than a proxy. They're using black men as a proxy for all the black people, black men and black women alike, who say, wait a minute here, Kamala Harris has to be held accountable for what she's done. She must suffer consequences for the harm that she's done against black people. They're just mentioning black men as basically a proxy for all black people because that's how they look at us. They look at us as all being just one gigantic nigger, and that being the case, they're saying black men specifically, but it's all black people, black men and black women alike, who they're talking about. If you're a black person who is not kissing Kamala Harris's behind, then that's who they're talking about. They're talking about you. Problem is, any sort of boosting or praise for Kamala Harris falls flat when you consider that she almost never mentions these alleged attempts to reform the system unless someone brings it up. If somebody else brings it up, then she'll mention it. But the other 90% of the time, she's all about immigrants and LGBT people. I mean, Kamala Harris, when she was getting ripped up one side and down the other by Tulsi Gabbard, all she could say is her empty rhetoric about, I was trying to reform the system. I was trying to make changes. She can't say what she actually did. She can't actually say what changes were made. Oh, but she was trying. Oh, but she was trying so much, and she was doing things you just couldn't see any of it. That's all. No one ever has to prompt Kamala Harris to mention what she wants to do for immigrants or LGBT people or what have you. She's always ready to give the political stump speech for them. She's always ready to list off what it is she's going to do for them. But black folks, on the other hand, well, you gotta bring it up first. She's not going to willingly bring that up. She doesn't want to give the misimpression to all those casual racists, read white moderates, that she's actually thinking about black folks. She wants to send the message, well, I'm not really thinking about black people, but if someone brings it up, I'll go ahead and we all have a wink and a nod. I'm not going to say anything specific. It's just going to be, well, this is something for everybody. And black people, well, you're part of everybody too, right? Now we're talking about the fact that black people were singled out to be specifically disadvantaged. Hence, we must be singled out to be specifically advantaged. You got to balance the scales, and you don't do that by putting the same weight on both sides. Paul Butler tries to prop up Kamala's record by saying that as a senator, she co-sponsored the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act of 2020. By the way, he doesn't name any other legislation other than that. That's about the only thing he can find. So apparently Kamala Harris isn't the only one who's tapped out whenever you ask her, hey, what legislation have you actually proposed, much less passed, when it comes to punishing all of these anti-black violence acts? What are you putting on the books? Kamala Harris isn't the only one who can't think of anything. But even this doesn't wash because, first of all, she co-sponsored the legislation. She didn't write it, not the way her running mate Jim Crow Joe Biden wrote the '94 crime bill. So the only legislation that former federal prosecutor Paul Butler can think of to try to help out his fellow prosecutor Kamala Harris, only thing he can name is a law written this year that she didn't even write. She just put her name on it. Hell, that's the easiest thing to do. Any fool can put their name on a law as a co-sponsor. Kamala had no problem, on the other hand, pushing legislation, virtually writing legislation to lock up black mothers if their kids skip school. That truancy law, that was largely Kamala Harris's doing. No co-sponsorship on that. She was spearheading that one personally. But when it comes to legislation to punish the police, she's not spearheading anything. She ain't leading anything. Oh, don't ask her to write any legislation. All of a sudden, she lost her pen. Her word processor's on the fritz. Secondly, the next reason why it's stupid for Paul Butler to praise his fellow prosecutor Kamala for co-sponsoring the George Floyd bill is because she's a Democrat, so there's very little chance that she wouldn't support legislation proposed by her own party. Thirdly, Kamala Harris had just been forced to drop out of the presidential primary a mere 6 months before this bill was proposed. Finally, it's 2020. Can't Mr. Butler point out any racial justice legislation with Kamala's name on it before the last 2 months? Can't he name something before the last 60 days? I mean, she's been in the Senate since 2017, and she couldn't be bothered to lend her name to any legislation until this year. Forget about writing any legislation. She couldn't even be bothered to even put her name on any legislation that might be seen as actually punishing the police for the crimes they commit against black people. Another point, why is Kamala, who suddenly discovered her conscience this year, why is she not running on a platform to make the George Floyd bill law? And also that she wants reciprocal legislation in all 50 states. Why is she not running on a raft of legislation like that? Shouldn't those be the planks of her and Joe's political platform? But instead, it's a matter of, unless you hear from the former prosecutor, or rather former fellow prosecutor Paul Butler, you don't even know that Kamala Harris was part of that. She's not bragging about that. When it comes time to talk about what's going to be done to punish the police, the one thing that might be misconstrued as Kamala Harris actually taking on the system that she propped up and enforced for so long, she doesn't even mention it herself. And neither do her supporters. No, it's a matter of they'll come to black folks and they'll wag their fingers at black people and see if they can get any mileage out of this misrepresentation. But when it comes to them being in front of white folks, being in front of those cameras, well, we ain't mentioning that. That was just something for black people's consumption to see if it would pacify them, to see if it would take the wind out of the sails of all of these detractors in the black media who are putting Kamala Harris's business on Front Street. All of these black people who are making it where people like Kamala Harris must be punished for their crimes. Well, let's see if we can take any momentum away from them. Oh, it didn't work? Okay, well, we'll try to come up with something else. Not surprisingly, Paul Butler doesn't mention that Kamala has received the endorsement of the police unions on more than one occasion in her political career. He doesn't bring that up at all. He doesn't bring up the grievances. Instead, it's just a lecture that if black men don't support Kamala Harris, it's because of sexism. I guess this is how they're going to cry themselves to sleep after she loses again. See, black shills like Butler, they know what their job is. And it's to be the black sock puppet who will legitimize the institutions of white supremacy. He knows his job is not to challenge or impugn them. He understands what Joy Reid and Roly-Poly also understand. It's not Kamala Harris that these clowns are trying to defend. It's the police. Not in spite of their racism and violence, but because of it. That's who they're actually trying to defend. Because if they can get you to support Kamala Harris, as she clearly is not going to do anything to punish the police, and they've already begun the process of pushing back against all the progress that's been made just in the last few months, or rather last few years, because this was not just an overnight thing. But to them, that's what this is about. This is about, we got to turn this thing around. Well, if we can get them to vote for her, even though she's not saying that she's going to punish the police. Okay, granted, she's not saying that she's going to help the police, but she's not saying that she's going to punish them either. And we can start them in baby steps and try to move them back to the old position. See if we can get these niggers to stand down. Let me tell you something. This society, this country is corrupt to its rotten core. It was set up to give things to people based on skin color and not on merit. White supremacy is all about making sure that there is a system of goodies, giveaways, and guarantees. That you are going to receive it as an ironclad promise. White supremacy is an agreement. It's a promise. It's a pledge. It is a contract between the government and between those classified as white. That there's a lot of things you're going to be having handed to you simply by virtue of the fact that you're classified as white. You do not have to work for it. You do not have to earn it. You don't have to qualify for it. Your qualification is your skin. And just to make sure that you understand your privileged position, there are these other people over here. They are going to be attacked. They are going to be murdered. They are going to be marginalized and disenfranchised, not because of anything they did, not because they did anything to disqualify themselves, but by virtue of their skin color. So we will firmly establish the in crowd and the out crowd. And if you want to keep this raft of undeserved and unwarranted goodies, giveaways, and guarantees flowing in, well, you know what you have to do. You got to protect this system that's giving you everything for free. The only way to maintain a hideously corrupt system like this is through an apparatus of organized violence. And that violence cannot and must not have any oversight. That's the reason why you got all of these scumbags in political office on the so-called left and right who are all in agreement we cannot punish the police. The police are never to be punished. No laws, no legislation, no anything. We cannot punish them. Because they are the ones who are the official guardians of white privilege and white primacy. The thugs who carry out the violence, if you start punishing them, they're going to become reluctant. When they realize, oh man, the only thing that protecting white privilege gets you is a prison cell, then what happens is, well, hell, only thing left to do is to get rid of white privilege itself. Without guardians, there's nothing to protect it. You can punish the race soldiers, and you can also punish the beneficiaries of white supremacy. First, they challenge the thugs who protect white supremacy. Next, they're going to be coming to take the white supremacist ill-gotten and undeserved wealth. This is why what happened to that geriatric Ken and Barbie who called themselves pulling guns on those BLM protesters, that's why it was so shocking to the white supremacists. To them, that's just a preview of what they can expect when there's no more organized violence to protect their position in society. They know that their position happens to be a fraud, but they also know that the people who are in the best position to change all of this have been kept in check through a campaign of unrelenting, unchecked, unstopped violence. But what happens when the victims start fighting back? What happens when the victims start pushing back and they put the protectors of white supremacy on their heels? What happens is you have an opportunity for something this country's never had, and that's democracy. As Dr. John Henrik Clarke said, this country could not exist for a single hour if democracy actually were to occur. And so their goal is to make sure that doesn't happen. There is no democracy under white supremacy. There is only white fiat. What they say on Monday is law, and they can say something completely different on Tuesday. They can punish you on Wednesday, execute you on Thursday, and then on Friday change their minds and say, hey, whatever we said on Monday, we're going to go ahead and go with that. That's what happened in Texas. Greg Abbott said, if you have any of your businesses open, I am putting in place a law that you will be given prison time and a fine and all of that if you call yourself opening up these businesses. Then a white woman did it and a black judge punished her for it. And Greg Abbott said, on second thought, I'm going to undo and reverse my own law, my own executive order. I'm going to go ahead and reverse it. Just kidding. There's not going to be any punishments at all now. Now you got to let everybody go. That's white supremacy for you. This is what Kamala Harris has dedicated her entire life to defending, her and Joe Biden. This is what they have dedicated their lives to. And Paul Butler doesn't say anything about this. Before you go calling yourself lecturing black people about what they should or should not do, don't you think at the very least you need to make it clear that Kamala Harris is innocent of all of these accusations against her? Instead, he cops to it. The bastard this scumbag Paul Butler, he actually cops to all of it. He doesn't deny any of it. He acknowledges it. He concedes the point. Yes, Kamala Harris did all this stuff. He doesn't even bother to try to defend her. Instead, he comes up with some weak, feeble, well, a couple of months ago, she co-sponsored a bill. Man, miss me with that. Miss me with that. The left arm of white supremacy desperately needs Kamala Harris to win because of what that would signify socially. What it would mean is that the same black folks who were threatening to overturn this system, that apparently they're going to be turning back to the very operators and the very people who operate this system of evil. We're going to see if they will change it. The people who have been locking up black folks and imprisoning black people and killing black people and supporting the murders of black people and smiling and laughing all the while, we're going to see if these guys will actually tear down the very system that they themselves erected in the first place. This election is supposed to be a referendum on the black media and on the black grassroots. Kamala Harris wins and it becomes a matter of, see, you guys don't matter, and your concerns and interests don't matter. We have effectively been able to put in place a workaround. This is supposed to be a political referendum. She wins, then what that means is the status quo is preserved. See, they need her to win, and they need her to win like this. They need her to win without renouncing her record or without renouncing the police. They need her to win without saying, I was wrong. I have been a complete and thorough tool of white supremacy. Everything that I did was wrong and I knew it when I was doing it. She cannot indict herself. She has to win without renouncing herself. Because for her to win without owning up to her past or renouncing it, that would be a complete repudiation of the uprisings and the impetus to break the enforcement arm of white supremacy. And that's what this is about. This is meant to be a political referendum at the ballot box. If a woman who clearly has run on a record of a lifetime, a public career of attacking black people through the courts, everything that she's done, she's never said that she didn't do it. Instead, it's a matter of, well, I did it, but I had a good reason, or I didn't know about it. The people who work in my office, they all did it, and I had no idea what was going on. That's, by the way, that's who you want as president. You want a woman who can't even run a prosecutor's office, but she's going to run the country somehow. And if this unrepentant anti-black zealot actually seizes the White House without having to indict and repudiate herself, then what that means is, yep, see, you can go ahead and put a blatant anti-black race soldier in the White House. You can slap them in the face and they'll be tripping over themselves to vote for you. At least that's what they're hoping will happen. Because right now, being a cop or a prosecutor, that makes you ineligible for public office. With at least 40% of the electorate, 2 out of 5 people in this country would not vote for you if you had been a cop or a prosecutor. Now, unless the establishment pushes back hard, then they're going to be robbed of one of the main means by which they reward racist cops and police. It's no accident that a number of police officers and prosecutors go into politics, that they decide that they want to become part of the legislature. I want to be governor. What's my bona fides? I used to be a cop, so I know how to keep those niggers in line. That used to be a resume enhancer. Now it kills your career. That's probably the reason why they're trying to push back. Well, you should love the cops. Not all cops are bad. Yeah, because once you're a cop who's been killing black folks, you're a dependable cog in the white supremacist machine. And that's the point. You lock black people up, you abuse black people, you deny them their rights, and you get to climb the ladder. White power will bestow all of these goodies and rewards on you, while you wind up like Paul Butler. You get to have a nice little professorship at a university, and the white media brings you on and pays you a appearance fee every time you get on one of their stupid cable shows. Why, you're in, and if you got a book that you scribbled, they'll let you plug your book on their show while you're on the inside track. This is part of the system of perks that you get for having been a loyal operative of white supremacy and helping to be a person with dark skin who gives your blessings to the prison industrial complex. You do that and they'll reward you. Except we're making it where the rewards are not going to be coming anymore. And what will be the incentive for the next Kamala Harris or the next Paul Butler? If you already know that the only thing that locking up black folks is going to get you is going to be nothing, if you already understand that, well, you have a hell of a lot less incentive to do it. If you already know that, forget about becoming vice president, you're not even going to become senator or congressman. Hell, you're probably not even going to be able to become DA. If you already know that, then what happens is the incentive to go after black people is greatly reduced. There's nothing but downside to that. There's no real advantages. You're going to be a prosecutor and top out there until they find some means to get you out of office or otherwise to neutralize the prosecutor's office, which they all know is coming next. You start off with the police, but it's only a matter of time before the public turns their attention to these DAs and these state attorney generals and such. But as it stands, you won't even be able to become a DA unless you promise to go after the police and to not lock people up unless they have a badge. They know where this is going. No matter what the Paul Butlers and other white media shills try to claim, Kamala Harris's record has not been distorted. Not by us anyway. It is, however, being distorted by Paul Butler. His pathetic attempts to pretend that she's something that she isn't. But this is what you're reduced to when you've lost control of the narrative. Kamala Harris is damaged goods. Oh no, it's not imaginary sexism from black men that's her biggest problem. The problem happens to be racism, namely Kamala Harris's own racism against black people. Her lifetime of anti-black racism has caught up to her. Now, back in California, the California political machine could protect her and insulate her from consequences. And all low-down Willie Brown had to do was just tell the other candidates to bow out of the race and hand the DA's office or the Attorney General's office or even a Senate seat to his pet thought, Kamala. Well, that's the way that it worked out there, but once you go nationwide, you find that there's a lot more black folks in a lot more areas you have to contend with. And Willie Brown doesn't have any stroke outside of San Francisco, pun intended. So I don't give a dang about any of these black sock puppets the white media's trying to have get out here. And if they can't push the gender war button, they'll try to see if there's any mileage they can get from shaming black men. Paul Butler is a mediocre lawyer and a pathetic student of history, or even recent events. The fact that the white media is now pivoting to acknowledge that black men are going to vote this election cycle too, that tells us they realize that black women are not falling for their divide and conquer strategy. Up until now, they haven't been saying anything about black men. It's been all about black women. Black women are the Democratic Party. Where black women go, the party follows. Ain't what that Cheryl Laird was saying on NPR and in the New York Times? Oh, what about black men? What about them? They haven't been mentioning black men at all. This was going to basically be the reintroduction of black women onto the white feminist plantation. That's what this was supposed to be. You go ahead and psychologically masturbate black women and why you'll have them eating out of your hand. At least that's what they thought was going to happen. Instead, what's happened is black women have gotten on code and stayed on code. The fact that the white media is having to change position now from trying to figure out how to schmooze black women to, well, you black men, you guys, if you don't show up to vote for Kamala Harris, there's something wrong with you, and it's sexism. That tells us, yeah, they realize, okay, we didn't get any mileage out of the you go girl strategy. The Oprah-ganda hasn't worked. So now the con is to shame black men for telling the truth about Kamala Harris and the white supremacist who she carries water for. Well, Paul Butler, you need to know that there's no amount of lying or shaming tactics that's going to work. Bakari's sellout tried it last year, and at least he had the good manners not to make a lecture out of it. He stuck to a couple of brain-dead brain farts on Twitter, and he pretty much left it at that. The more that you ignore Kamala Harris's anti-black record, the worse it makes her look. It's not as if people are going to forget about it just because you don't mention it. It's not as if people are going to go, well, if you're not talking about it, I guess it must not matter. No, it's the only thing people are talking about, as they should. Past performance is the only clear indicator of future results. Kamala Harris, if you want to know what kind of president she would make, look at what kind of attorney general and DA that she made in California. That tells you exactly what kind of VP she's going to be. That tells you exactly what kind of president she would make. Because let's face it, nobody seriously believes that Joe Biden's going to make it the whole 8 years or even 4 years. So it's perfectly understood that there's a better than 50% chance that at some point in the near future, if Joe Biden does get elected, Kamala Harris will be taking the oath of office before too long. And not talking about her anti-black record, not actually holding the system that she enforced and used and weaponized against black people to account, you're not going to get away with ignoring that. The white media and the Paul Butlers, they understand exactly what it is that the black media and the black grassroots are doing. We are putting the whole damn sick, twisted system on trial. We're using Kamala Harris as a proxy for the system. We're holding her up as an example of everything that's wrong with this country. We're holding her up as an example of everything that's wrong with the injustice system. We're using her as a proxy the same way that they try to use black people as political proxies. And it's working. And trying to ignore it, that's not going to work. Because Kamala Harris's anti-black judicial record, that's the pink elephant in the room. Hell, it's not just an elephant, it's a pink elephant leaving piles of pachyderm poo all over the room. And not talking about it won't make it go away, and it won't make it smell any better either. Butler closed out his little hit piece against black men by saying that he was hesitant to tackle this subject because this moment isn't really about black men. Well, my response to that is, why even write this garbage at all? If this moment isn't really about black men, shouldn't you be quiet right now? But of course, that was a rhetorical question on his part. He already knew exactly what it was that he was going to be saying. Of course he had to bring this up. He wasn't going to shut up for any reason. As he went on to write, putting black men first has been the pattern of virtually every U.S. racial justice movement. Can you believe the bastard had the nerve to write that? First of all, it's a bald-faced lie. Hell, everybody from Rosa Parks to the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing, these were not black men who were the subjects of those white supremacist race attacks. It was black females who were. When Jack Johnson ran around with white women, they passed the Mann Act to put him in prison. But it was a black woman and her white fiancé who the country made a change for when it came to interracial marriages in the U.S. Think about that. So his talking point, no matter which angle you want to come at from either a black empowerment angle or from an intersectionalist angle, because people like Paul Butler, they have a perversely broad definition of what constitutes a justice struggle. He has a very broad definition of what constitutes a racial justice movement. To him, interracial sexual access, that's racial justice. Someone like him, he would be far more interested in Loving v. Virginia than he would be Brown versus Board of Education. So when it comes to talking about black women who have been front and center at various points in the struggle, Paul Butler doesn't think about that. And you want to know some other black women who he doesn't think about? Sandra Bland, Ayanna Jones, Tatiana Jefferson, Rekia Boyd, Breonna Taylor, Renisha McBride, Charlena Lyles, and Matrice Richardson. The black media has been there for all of those black women, black girls in the case of Ayanna Jones, and we're still here. Where was Paul Butler at? Where was Kamala Harris at? How about the Democratic Party? How about Me Too? Or these sock puppet groups like Say Her Name, these professional do-nothing organizations, these LGBT fronts, where the hell were they at? While the black media was calling out Harvey Weinstein for the black women who he attacked and menaced, some with Oprah's help, allegedly, where the hell was Tarana Burke, aka KRS-Two, at? She was busy telling us that it's not her job to go after white offenders, not even to protect black women. Well, the black media doesn't have a hands-off policy for white sexual predators. It was Jason Black who led the effort to put up a billboard in Louisville telling the race soldiers that black men are here for Breonna Taylor. Oprah, she showed up, bringing up the rear. I guess she couldn't rip herself away from whatever buffet line she and Roly Poly were in. Like the rest of these black bootlicks, like these professional do-nothing black organizations, the NAACP and the Urban League and the National Action Network, they've all got their spring, fall, winter, summer luncheons, all of them eating, but none of them doing the work. The black media has. Paul Butler ain't been saying a damn thing about all these black women killed by these race soldiers, but the black media has. So he doesn't know what the hell he's talking about saying black men have always been put first in virtually every U.S. racial justice movement. No, just the one or two that he and his white liberal buddies make time to talk about. But over here, with the black grassroots, we have not forgotten about Tatiana Jefferson. We have not forgotten about innocent little Ayanna Jones. We have not forgotten about Matrice Richardson. But you know who has forgotten about Matrice Richardson? Kamala Harris. Not once, but twice. And Paul Butler, of course, who couldn't spare one word for Matrice Richardson. See, this is what happens when you're a black tool, when you're a black sock puppet, when you're a black sellout. You can only say what white power wants you to say, and you better not get off message. So you can say some bald-faced lies that black men have always been put front and center. See that garbage that he said? If it sounds familiar, there's a reason for that. You see Paul Butler trafficking in that old, dead feminist line about black men are privileged in a privileged position. Black men have got it so good in America. They're men, so that means... This is some of that old black male privilege. Black men are the white people of black people claptrap. So it ain't just some anonymous LGBT undercover spokespeople who say that mess. You got Paul Butler, you got the Washington Post trying to see if they can get any mileage out of that either. So Paul Butler couldn't spare any column space for Matrice Richardson or Ayanna Jones. He didn't have anything to say for them. He couldn't spare a little bit of space for them, but he does have plenty to say, trying to push the button of black men are privileged. Black men are privileged just like white men. That's the button that he's trying to push. And he's hoping that black women will notice it. Because the subject of this hit piece may be black men, but the object, the target of the article is clearly black women. This is attempting to galvanize the hood rat vote by pushing the old gender warring narrative. Black men don't support black women. No, only in Paul Butler's imagination. Only among the self-hating black bootlicks who consider themselves to be feminists, white feminists they think of themselves as, just white feminists with a really bad tan. They're the only ones who go for that crap. Out here in the real world, we know better. And finally, Paul Butler, he closed with writing that African-American men should be cheering Harris on as black women have always cheered us on. He leaves out that black women aren't cheering Kamala Harris on. They damn sure didn't cheer her on during the primaries, now did they? You see, he leaves that part out, because what this is about is having failed to trick black women into going for the okie doke. Now they're trying to figure out if they can attack black men, if that's going to do anything. This is desperation on their part. And by the way, to vote for someone simply because they claim to be black, that ain't good enough. That would be like saying vote for David Clark. That would be like saying if Clarence Thomas leaves the Supreme Court and decides he wants to run for office, you should vote for him because he's black. And by the way, for a clown like Paul Butler to say that mess, that tells us this is the height of stupidity. We don't cheer someone on simply because they have a requisite amount of melanin. We only cheer someone on if they represent our interest. Kamala doesn't. And speaking of interest, at no point in Mr. Butler's little screed does he bother to mention black people's interests. As far as he's concerned, black people, especially even black men, he's writing this letter allegedly to black men, but he doesn't actually say what black men's interests are. He doesn't say, well, here's what black men say that they want, and Kamala Harris is repping this instead. It's a matter of, you should vote for her because I say so. Not once does he devote even one sentence to saying what it is that we want, and then saying how Kamala Harris intends to get it for us. Instead, it's shaming tactics and a temper tantrum in the form of a lecture. Yeah, these black bootlicks, they're realizing that they're irrelevant. And the white media doesn't need black shills who none of us listen to. First it was Agent Duvernay, now it's Paul Butler. I'm sure there'll be some other fools along soon. Notice that here there's absolutely no attempt to persuade any black person, black men or black women in this piece. This is not meant to persuade you. This is not meant to convince you of anything. This is not meant to disabuse you of any illusions. Oh, you thought Kamala was this? We got to get rid of that. No attempt at that at all. Instead of just finger wagging and pathetic shaming tactics, because in order to persuade someone, you have to offer something that will entice them. We don't want a pat on the head from the dominant society. And unlike Paul Butler, our hearts don't go pitter-pat at the prospect of interracial sexual access. And we don't want soaring rhetoric and empty words. Black people have made it clear this is the age of tangibles. It is also the age of punishment for those who have been part of the apparatus that's attacked us. Those are the two things that we're interested in. You can call this the political equivalent of guns and butter, or rather, buttering guns. The butter is going to be the do-re-mi that we get, and the guns is going to be the punishment that is the consequences for those who have been attacking us. The very thing that they know they can't afford to offer us. And by the way, Paul Butler, because I know clowns, narcissistic chumps like you scour the internet to see if anybody's talking about you. Whenever you choose to mention your fellow mushmouth lawyer Benjamin Crump and brag about how Crump has endorsed Kamala Harris, just so you know, that's a bad thing in the black community. You didn't score any points with us or with anyone else, but I get it. It's the last brain cell in your head that trots out some mushmouth lawyer to do your talking for you. And of course, it's the last brain cell in the black bootlick's head that thinks that the same kind of nonsense that might play well with white liberals is going to play with the black grassroots. The only thing that we're interested in for Kamala Harris is punishment. She must face the consequences of her 30-year war against black people, and Joe Biden has to go down right alongside her. We are not going to help push a referendum that's meant to nullify and repudiate what we've fought for so long. We are not going to be helping a woman who has spent her entire adult life attacking black people, maligning black people, laughing while she targets and dreams up new ways to put black people in prison. Has she laughed as she kept black people, innocent black people in prison beyond their terms? We're not going to be trying to find out some way to help her out. Oh, we'll be helping her out all right. Which way does she come in? That's the way she's going out. And Paul Butler and the rest of the black bootlicks, you're not going to be able to do anything to stop that. You're not in charge. Your white media pals, they may be able to give you a platform, but what they cannot give you is legitimacy. All of your years of lying for and covering up for white supremacy have also caught up to you too, Mr. Butler. Yeah, Kamala Harris isn't the only one who's finding out that there's black folks out here who are making sure that when you've committed all these sins, that you will be made to answer, and you'll be answering to the people who you sinned against.